Imagine a world where nature is your only landlord. The rain is free, the forest is your pantry, and the river doesn't ask for a passport. For centuries, this was the reality of medieval life. A hard existence, sure, but one where the basics of survival belonged to everyone. But then, it happened. One morning, a nobleman woke up, looked out at a peasant picking up a stick or baking a loaf of bread, and felt a sudden, profit-driven rage. He didn't see a community surviving, he saw a revenue stream going to waste. This is the story of how the simplest joys of human existence were snatched away, item by item, by the original geniuses of corporate greed, the medieval lords.
Before medieval Europe invented taxes, tolls, and the kind of emotional damage that only a landlord can provide, there was the communal bread oven. It was the one wholesome institution a peasant could actually rely on. The setup was simple. You brought your sad ball of dough, your neighbor brought their slightly sadder dough, and everyone baked together in a stone structure that looked older than time itself. There were no fees, no bureaucratic rules, and no lord breathing down your neck, just soot, the crackle of the fire, and the faint, unmistakable smell of hope. Then disaster struck. One morning, the local lord woke up feeling suspicious. He sensed joy somewhere in his territory, a peasant laughing, someone whistling, maybe a woman admitting she felt content. To a man who views happiness as lost revenue, this was a crisis. He stormed into the village square, stared at that oven like it owed him back rent, and declared, "This belongs to me now. If you want bread, pay me." Imagine being a starving farmer in 1140 AD, holding your raw dough and listening to a man who's never even touched flour explain that heat is now a premium luxury. The peasants just blinked at him in confusion, like chickens watching someone build a trebuchet. When someone whispered that the oven belonged to the community, the lord, a man who probably thought grain grew pre-packaged, simply smiled and said, "Not anymore." Suddenly, baking was a subscription service. No coin, no bread. And if you had no bread, well, congratulations, you've unlocked medieval intermittent fasting permanently. Some rebels tried baking at home, but medieval houses were basically flammable suggestions. One spark and the entire neighborhood ignited like it was auditioning to be Mordor. Attempting self-sufficiency became an arson speed run. Naturally, the lord took advantage. If the oven burned your bread, there was a fee. If you burned the oven, a bigger fee. If you breathed too loudly while waiting in line, that was an unspecified insolence fee that changed daily. What was once a simple town gathering became the medieval version of the DMV. Long lines, terrible service, and a man in charge who clearly hated everyone. Before the nobility figured out how to charge for sunlight, rivers were the ultimate lifeline. Water flowed freely, fish swam peacefully, and the only thing dangerous about the river was drowning, which frankly was still a better experience than meeting your landlord. You drank from it, washed in it, and dumped questionable things into it while pretending not to see your neighbor doing the exact same thing. It was a perfect open access system for people with zero money and zero rights. But then, a nobleman on horseback decided the water looked a bit too accessible. He stared at the current like it had personally insulted his boots and declared, "This river is now taxed." The peasants froze mid-drink like medieval deer in torchlight. "Taxed, my lord, but the river moves." And with the chilling confidence of a true villain, he replied, "Yes, and now it moves for me." This was the birth of river tolls, the medieval equivalent of charging people for the privilege of breathing. They built wooden bridges over shallow streams you could easily wade through for free. If you tried to wade, congratulations, you just committed toll evasion, a crime punishable by heavy fines or a quick drowning demonstration if the guard was bored. The lords did not clean the rivers or maintain the banks. They were the kind of men who believed water flowed downhill simply out of respect for their authority. Some villages even introduced livestock contemplation fees, where a cow looking too longingly at the water was considered a taxable event. By the end of the century, nature's ATM only worked one way. It took your coins and gave you back nothing but a scenic view you were now paying to observe. It didn't stop at the water's edge. Even the simple act of grinding grain at home became a criminal enterprise. For generations, families used small hand mills, 2 rocks and some arm strength, to turn their harvest into flour. It wasn't fast, but it was free. To a lord, however, that rhythmic scraping sound wasn't industry, it was the sound of a missed monopoly. He rode into the village, declared hand mills illegal, and effectively turned every kitchen into a crime scene. Owning a grinding stone was suddenly like running an underground casino. You were forced to use the Lord's mill, where a miller who definitely never washed his hands took a fee from your sack, then a second fee because he liked the look of your grain, leaving you with less flour and significantly less will to live. If the Lord's inspectors caught you with a hidden stone at home, they'd smash it in a public tantrum. As one lord actually wrote, "Independence breeds arrogance." In other words, if you're doing it yourself, I can't charge you for it.
Firewood was the medieval peasant's ultimate emotional support system. Cold, firewood. Hungry, firewood. Sad about the crushing weight of feudalism? Firewood and maybe some quiet crying behind the barn. It was the one resource you could collect without a permit or a lecture on trespassing. It fell off trees naturally. God supplied it directly, no middleman needed. But in the eyes of a local baron, a peasant bending over to pick up a stick was a thief stealing heat from under his nose. He decided to own every branch in the forest, transforming the woods into protected royal timberland, which is just lord speak for "I'm charging for something I didn't know existed 7 minutes ago." Soon, collecting a twig required a permit dangling from your belt like a sad ornament. Peasants became underpaid ninjas, sneaking through the brush at night, gripping branches as if they were precious jewels. If you accidentally picked up a branch that was too fresh, you were accused of cutting live wood, a crime punished so severely you'd think the baron was avenging a fallen family member. Nature had become a premium service. Walking, the only transportation a peasant had besides collapsing from exhaustion, wasn't safe. A baron would move 2 rocks, call it modernized infrastructure, and throw up a gate, not for defense, but to demand a toll for the privilege of moving in a straight line. Merchants, monks, and children carrying turnips all had to pay to walk on dirt they had already compacted with their own feet. If you tried to walk through the grass to bypass the gate, a guard would seemingly grow out of the soil to fine you for unauthorized bypassing. By the time you reached the river to catch a fish, you found that the fish, the frogs, and even the confused eels now belonged to the Lord's estate. Fishing became a licensed activity, where the license was just a verbal threat. If a trout leapt into your bucket during a storm, that was attempted precipitation theft. The ultimate insult, however, fell from the sky. A lord noticed the peasants' roofs glistening after a storm and decided that since the clouds drifted over his land, the rain was his personal property. Water falling on your face was now technically a crime. People hid barrels behind houses and cupped their hands discreetly during downpours, terrified of the moisture inspectors. From the grass beneath their feet, which was now a taxable grazing event, to the beer they brewed in secret to avoid the ale tax, the message was clear. In the Middle Ages, nature did not belong to the people. It belonged to whoever shouted "mine" the loudest while holding a sword. Even the most sacred moments of human connection weren't immune to the Lord's financial anxiety. Marriage in the medieval world was supposed to be a simple alliance, 2 people joining forces to survive a very angry universe. But then the lords discovered merchet. This was not a romantic tradition, it was a marriage fee. Essentially, a father had to pay the lord for the privilege of letting his daughter leave the house to start her own life. It was a paywall for the heart. If you tried to marry in secret, officiated by a monk who had long since given up on earthly logic, the tax collectors would fine you. Even widows were charged a fee to remarry, because apparently surviving one husband and the plague was not enough of a struggle. The final frontier of this greed was the very bridges built to help people survive. Many were originally constructed by monks as an act of charity, simple planks to keep the community from freezing in the current. But the moment a nobleman saw a sturdy bridge, he didn't see safety, he saw a missed opportunity. Gates were bolted down, guards were stationed, and suddenly crossing a glorified wooden toothpick required a coin. When the peasants asked where the money went, the lords claimed maintenance, even as the wood rotted beneath their feet. From the bread in your oven to the rain on your roof, the medieval era was a masterclass in turning existence into an invoice. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the control. The lords knew that if a peasant could eat, walk, and love for free, they might start to think they were free too. So they taxed the grass, they taxed the beer, and they taxed the very air during a forest stroll. They took a world of communal abundance and carved it into a gated community, proving that if humans need it to survive, there will always be someone standing nearby with a ledger and a sword, ready to charge for it.